Hi everyone, I'm Anita Sharma. You're watching AnewZ live from Baku. Here's what's making news right now. Emmanuel Macron meets with the Polish Prime Minister and President to discuss long-term security and peace for Ukraine. The U.S. Secretary of State talks to Jordan's king about starting a crisis tour about Syria. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte pushes for increased defense spending. We begin in Warsaw, where French President Emmanuel Macron met with Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. The leaders discussed important issues related to Ukraine's security and peace negotiations, and, of course, held talks on ensuring long-term stability in the region.
During the meeting of French President Emmanuel Macron with Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk in Warsaw, the issue of Ukraine was discussed, including the possibility of sending European troops as a security guarantee in the event of a peace agreement with Russia. This option is being considered if a peace agreement is reached.
The
only possible peace is a sustainable peace. That is to say, a peace which is negotiated by the Ukrainians and which allow them to have security solutions for the long term. And in the end, we share and we have just measured the same will to say, no peace in Ukraine without the Ukrainians. That is, we cannot discuss concessions, the points to put on the table for the Ukrainians in their name, that is for them to do. But there's no security in Europe without Europeans, and that is the importance of the debates that we have and are ongoing.
The Polish Prime Minister stated that Poland has no plans to send troops to Ukraine, amid speculation that Western states might deploy military forces if a ceasefire is achieved.
I would also like, if my friend Macron will permit me, to use this occasion for this purpose, to cut off speculation about the topic of the potential presence of this or that country in Ukraine after reaching a ceasefire, a peace arrangement. President Macron is aware of this. We talked about it. Decisions concerning Poland will be made in Warsaw, and only in Warsaw. For now, we do not plan such actions. We will cooperate with France, and not only with France, on a solution that will, above all, protect Europe and Ukraine from the resumption of the conflict if an agreement regarding a possible peace can be reached.
Diplomats have noted that the issue of sending European troops to Ukraine will be on the agenda if a ceasefire and peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia are reached. Later, the French president met with Polish President AnewZ Duda in Warsaw. European powers are eager to demonstrate to Donald Trump, who will be inaugurated as US president on January 20, that they are willing to share the burden of ending the nearly 3-year-long war in Ukraine.
In Berlin, European foreign ministers talked about long-term security guarantees and military support for Ukraine. German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock called for strong security guarantees for Ukraine and emphasized the need for European countries to be united. During her address, Baerbock underscored the importance of preserving Ukraine's agency in peace negotiations. She said, and I quote, "No peace will be achieved over the heads of Ukrainians," referencing her recent visit to the country. She also emphasized that today's discussions represent a renewed and strong signal of unity to safeguard peace across Europe.
Hier in diesem Kreis sind wir uns einig.
Here in this circle, we are united in agreeing that Ukraine needs strong security guarantees. We, as Europeans, also need strong security guarantees that show no cracks. This includes long-term military and financial support for Ukraine. As mentioned, we will discuss this option in greater depth today. It is clear that we must not only think big for our common security, but also act big and provide the necessary tools for that. With France, Poland, Italy, Spain, the UK, and the High Representative of the European Union, we are sending a clear message. We stand for the security and future of our European continent.
to Syria now, with European Council President Antonio Costa and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer agreeing on the, quote, importance of ensuring a peaceful transition towards long-term political stability in the failed state. They met at 10 Downing Street, where the UK government is still undecided about how to address the HTS rebels who overthrew Assad.
The UK government reiterated on Thursday that its priority remains to work closely with allies to ensure stability and that civilians are protected. UK Cabinet Secretary Pat McFadden had earlier in the week said there would be a relatively quick decision on whether HTS should remain on the list of proscribed organisations. Prime Minister Keir Starmer, though, says it's far too early to decide on changing its status. UK Foreign Minister David Lammy said London would judge the group by its actions, monitoring how it treats civilians in areas it controls. The leaders of HTS have been trying to convince the world it's an inclusive organisation that won't discriminate against ethnic and religious minorities in Syria. It was formed as an offshoot of Al-Qaeda to unite rebels against President Assad's forces, but then publicly cut ties with Al-Qaeda in 2016. However, the UK government never recognised the split and has always considered Al-Qaeda and HTS one and the same in its list of proscribed terror organisations. There's concern that could mean the UK misses a unique opportunity for engagement with the de facto leaders of Syria at such an important moment. One former UK National Security Advisor and a former head of Britain's Secret Intelligence Service has urged the government to act swiftly in its reassessment of the group's status. But a Downing Street spokesperson on Tuesday pushed back against the need for haste, saying the fact that HTS is a proscribed terrorist group does not prevent the government from engaging with HTS in the future. Political analysts expect that the UK would likely follow the lead of the United States, where for now HTS also remains listed as a terror organisation. Stuart Smith for AnewZ in London.
Meantime, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in the Middle East right now for talks following major developments in Syria. Blinken met with Jordan's King Abdullah in Aqaba, starting a crisis tour after the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad. Now, Washington is focused on Syria's political transition, securing chemical weapons, and ensuring humanitarian aid. Blinken will also visit Turkey to discuss Syria's future and regional tensions, including conflicts in Gaza and Lebanon.
I've had many calls over the last days with partners in the region, and everyone's agreed on the need to have a unified approach to advance many of our shared interests. And so here on the ground in the region, we're working to build up and build out that unified approach. That was the basis of my conversation with King Abdullah and Foreign Minister Safadi today here in Jordan. I'll continue those conversations with President Erdogan and Foreign Minister Fidan in Turkey.
While with curfews now lifted, Syria sees a resurgence in commerce as markets reopen and independent currency trading becomes legal under the transitional government.
Shops across Damascus now openly advertise money exchange services, marking a significant shift from earlier restrictions. The historic Ahmadiyya Bazaar, closed during recent turmoil, has reopened, reflecting a cautious return to normality. Syria's transitional government, led by Mohammed al-Bashir, is steering the country towards a free market economy. Efforts include easing financial regulations, stabilizing inflation, and encouraging the return of displaced Syrians. These changes aim to rebuild a nation recovering from years of conflict and economic strain. Once punishable by law, independent currency trading is now widespread. In downtown Damascus, businesses display signs offering currency exchange for various denominations, catering to locals and traders alike. The Syrian pound, which once stood at 50 to the dollar before 2011, now trades at 15,000, illustrating the economic challenges ahead. Economists see reopening markets and new financial freedoms as vital steps to attract investment and encourage economic recovery. The streets of Damascus, now adorned with flags symbolizing the interim government, showcase a nation striving for stability amid significant change.
Israeli troops have entered the buffer zone between Syria and the Golan Heights following the collapse of Bashar al-Assad's government. The forces have taken control of key sites near Israel's border. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office stated that the deployment is temporary and aims to maintain security until a force committed to the 1974 ceasefire agreement can be established. The Israeli government added that the collapse of Syria's government created a security vacuum in the buffer zone, which Israel cannot allow to be filled by jihadi groups that might pose a threat to Israeli communities in the Golan Heights. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban met with Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan in Ankara to discuss the Ukraine and Middle East conflicts. Foreign Minister of Turkey, Hakan Fidan, and his Hungarian counterpart were also present during the meeting. They discussed international affairs, chances of peace, and bilateral matters. Also, Hungarian-Turkish relations, which have grown dynamically since being elevated to a strategic partnership back in 2023. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte warns that the security situation does not look good, and he's calling for an increase in defense spending. Meantime, NATO members are in talks to raise the alliance's defense spending to about 3% of GDP. That would be up from the current 2%. All that, according to the Financial Times.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte warned that NATO must prepare for long-term confrontations with Russia and said the alliance is not ready for the challenges ahead. In his speech in Brussels, Rutte urged a shift to a wartime mindset, emphasizing the need to increase defense spending to counter Russia's growing military strength.
And Russia's defense industry is producing huge numbers of tanks, armored vehicles, and ammunition. What Russia lacks in quality, it makes up for in quantity, with the help of China, Iran, and North Korea. This all points in one clear direction. Russia is preparing for long-term confrontation. We can prevent the next big war on NATO territory and preserve our way of life. This requires us all to be faster and fiercer. It is time to shift to a wartime mindset and turbocharge our defense production and defense spending.
The discussions will continue as NATO plans for its upcoming summit next June. European NATO members are in talks to raise defense spending to 3% of GDP, up from the current target of 2%, Financial Times reports. The urgency for this increase has been driven by Donald Trump's demands and the realization that current defense spending is insufficient to support Ukraine and deter Russia. The talks, which started at a NATO foreign ministers meeting last week, propose a short-term commitment to reach 2.5%, with a long-term goal of 3% by 2030.
In the largest single-day act of clemency in modern U.S. history, U.S. President Joe Biden pardoned 39 Americans convicted of nonviolent crimes and commuted the sentences of roughly 1,500 people. Biden is reportedly also considering preemptive pardons for officials and allies who the White House fears could be unjustly targeted by incoming President Donald Trump's administration.
United States President Joe Biden has announced a historic clemency action, commuting the sentences of 1,500 individuals. They were on home confinement during the coronavirus pandemic. The president is also pardoning 39 people convicted of nonviolent offenses. This unprecedented clemency decision is the largest single-day act of its kind in modern United States history. In addition to this, Joe Biden is considering preemptive pardons for individuals who may face retribution under the incoming Donald Trump administration. These potential pardons could protect figures like Dr. Anthony Fauci, a key player in the U.S. response to the coronavirus pandemic, and others who might be targeted by politically motivated investigations. Biden's team is deliberating over issuing these pardons even before charges have been filed, a move that would set a significant precedent. The discussion around preemptive pardons also comes in the context of Joe Biden's recent decision to pardon his son, Hunter Biden, for federal thugs and gun violations. Hunter Biden's legal troubles had drawn attention, and the president's pardon extends not only to those offenses but to any potential future charges. Biden's decision is viewed as a protective measure against possible legal action from the Trump administration. While the pardoning power is a constitutional right of the president, some analysts argue that Biden's potential preemptive pardons are a unique and controversial use of this authority, raising questions about its implications for the future administrations.
Time magazine has named Donald Trump Person of the Year for the second time, recognizing his historic political comeback and reshaping of the American presidency. Trump was first named Person of the Year in 2016 after his presidential election win. Past recipients include former U.S. President Barack Obama, as well as Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg and Pope Francis, plus Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. In 2020, Time named Democratic President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris Person of the Year after their victory over Trump. Last year, pop star Taylor Swift received the title Person of the Year. Tensions are escalating in France as widespread strikes and protests erupt over a surge in layoffs, causing major disruptions nationwide. Thursday, public sector unions, including the General Confederation of Labor, launched a massive strike that paralyzed key services, particularly transportation. Public services ground to a halt as tens of thousands took to the streets in cities across the country. In Paris, a massive rally saw demonstrators marching through the capital, chanting slogans and waving banners aimed directly at the government. The unrest reflects growing frustration over layoffs across various industries and mounting dissatisfaction with current government policies. A new report from the French political group La France Insoumise has raised serious questions about President Emmanuel Macron's handling of New Caledonia. It highlights alleged marginalization of the Kanak people, accusations of neocolonialism, and violent unrest following controversial government actions. Let's get the full story now.
Clashes in New Caledonia earlier this year have drawn the ire of the far-left French opposition group La France Insoumise. At the centre of the controversy is a bill passed in April proposing changes to the electoral body for local and congressional elections in the territory. The report accuses the Macron government of pushing the bill through Parliament and the Senate in a way that disregards the historical sensitivities of New Caledonia's status as a French territory. While the territory voted to remain part of France in a series of referendums, the proposed changes are seen by some as marginalizing the Kanak people and threatening their cultural and political identity. The report describes the move as a form of neocolonialism. La France Insoumise, or LFI, has linked the implementation of the bill with blockades and violent clashes between independence activists, militias, and police in New Caledonia. The report suggests that 13 people died during the unrest, with at least 8 believed to be Kanak, allegedly killed by militias. It also accuses the French government of failing to disarm these groups and exacerbating tensions, which it says raised fears of further unrest. LFI criticizes the government for suspending the bill on the heels of the dissolution of Parliament, arguing that it should have been fully withdrawn and calling it a sword of Damocles hanging over the local population, creating prolonged uncertainty and unrest. The UN has expressed concern over the situation, pointing to a lack of dialogue, excessive use of force, and reports of human rights violations. Observers warn that the ongoing tensions could further destabilize the region. The French government has defended its actions, citing exceptional circumstances to legally justify measures such as the suspension of TikTok and other perceived restrictions on freedoms. However, LFI's report claims that investigations into the violence show disproportionate targeting of independentists. There are now renewed calls for greater accountability and fresh talks to address the Kanak people's concerns and ensure stability in the region.
Protests have intensified across South Korea as President Yoon Suk-yeol defends his controversial martial law declaration vowing to fight against impeachment efforts. With a second vote on his removal set for this weekend, demonstrators are clashing with police demanding his resignation.
The protests sparked by President Yoon Suk-yeol's controversial declaration of martial law drew around 60,000 people near the National Assembly, with smaller demonstrations also taking place in downtown areas.
The President Yoon Suk-yeol is not acknowledging his own mistakes and shamelessly keeping his stance, and that made me very angry.
Protesters, primarily from local workers' unions, clashed with police as they tried to march toward Yoon's official residence. Despite heavy police resistance, many managed to slip past barricades and disrupt traffic in the area. Here we are on the sidewalk and the police are blocking our way. We tried to pass through here and the police pulled me, so I almost fell down. This is a violent situation and they cannot block us like this. Yoon is facing a second impeachment vote in parliament on December 14, following a failed attempt the previous week after the ruling party boycotted the vote. If the vote passes, the case will be sent to South Korea's constitutional court, which has up to 6 months to rule on whether Yoon should be removed from office.
윤석열 대통령에 대한 2차
A second impeachment bill against President Yoon Suk-yeol has been jointly proposed. This impeachment bill was submitted on the grounds of serious violations of the Constitution and laws, citing the President's unconstitutional and unlawful declaration of martial law and his role as the leader of a treacherous act.
탄핵안을 제출했습니다.
The president is also under criminal investigation for his martial law declaration, which has rescinded shortly after it was announced. Yoon has pledged to fight to the end against the vote to oust him.
The International Energy Agency has forecasted a significant oil supply surplus for 2025, even as OPEC Plus extends production cuts and demand projections rise modestly.
The International Energy Agency expects a 950,000 barrels per day oil surplus next year, nearly 1% of global output. This comes after OPEC Plus, which includes the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries and other major hydrocarbon exporters like Russia, extended its production cuts until April 2025. The projected surplus is visualized in the chart, showing global oil supply at 101.95 million barrels per day compared to global oil demand at 101 million barrels per day, with a visible surplus of 0.95 million barrels per day. China's economic slowdown and rising adoption of electric vehicles have curbed oil demand this year. However, recent stimulus measures from Beijing have prompted the International Energy Agency to revise its 2025 global oil demand growth forecast to 1.1 million barrels per day, up from 990,000 barrels per day. Meanwhile, OPEC Plus has delayed planned output increases to April 2025 and extended production adjustments through the end of 2026, citing weak demand and rising output from outside the group. If OPEC Plus unwinds cuts as planned in March 2025, the International Energy Agency predicts the surplus could grow to 1.5 million barrels per day. For 2024, the International Energy Agency has lowered its demand growth projection to 840,000 barrels per day, an 80,000 barrels per day reduction from last month. While the International Energy Agency remains cautious about future demand, OPEC has expressed more optimism despite trimming its own forecast for 2023 and 2024.
The annual Harbin Ice and Snow World will take place in China's Heilongjiang province. With preparations almost complete, this iconic winter attraction is now ready for incoming visitors.
As the 26th Harbin Ice Snow World approaches, it remains a popular winter theme park in China. This year's main tower, titled Love Among Asia, was finished, and currently the light effects are being tested, making last-minute preparations right before the grand opening. Inspired by the Olympic Council of Asia's emblem, the tower features layered ice columns that create eye-catching visuals. Innovative lighting technology allows the tower to change colors and modes based on preset programs or cloud monitoring, offering visitors an impressive visual experience. Approximately 10,000 workers, including sculptors, constructors, and safety staff, are finalizing preparations for this iconic event. The festival is expected to open towards Christmas Day and last until February 2025.
That's all from our team. Thank you so much for watching AnewZ. Please stay up to date by visiting our website, AnewZ.tv. Have a great evening and day ahead. Bye for now.